The five fed in a circle, heads low over the carcass, the wet sound of their work carrying through the grass. The sixth watched from the tree line, motionless in the shadows. He was younger than all of them, but what held him still was not fear. He had followed the scent for 2 days, across the dry riverbed and through the thorn scrub, past the shallow graves of broken bones that marked the territory's edges. Now, he stood at the boundary of the worst thing he had ever smelled, and he did not move. What remained lay spread on the baked earth between the feeding males. The body had been dragged from the open ground where it fell, though drag was the wrong word for what they had done. They had eaten where the killing happened, the way a pride eats, the way a family takes its share. Only this was not his family. The young lion had known this place once. He had grown up here, in the long grass and the acacia shade, when the male now scattered across the ground was still the strongest thing in the territory. Now the wind carried a different truth to him, and the weight of it pressed against his chest where hunger should have been. He was nearly grown, his mane still thin and uneven, his body carrying the last awkwardness of adolescence. He had left this territory months ago, driven out by this same male as all young males are driven, sent wandering into a world that had no patience for his age. He had survived alone, learning the discipline of hunger and hiding, but he had come back. That was the thing nobody understood, watching him stand there with his tail low and his ears tracking every sound. He had come back because the territory was empty, because the calling had pulled him home, and instead he had found the feast. The five fed until the heat of the day pressed down, and the flies found them. Then they lay in the shade, bellies heavy, coats slick with what they had taken. They did not see the young lion move. They did not see him lower himself into the grass, one slow limb at a time. Here is what the books do not tell you about a lion. A lion does not grieve the way a man grieves. There is no ceremony, no standing vigil, no prayer spoken over the fallen. There is only the territory and the body that was its center, and the silence where the roar used to be. The young lion lay in the grass and watched the five sleep. He had counted them from the moment he arrived. 5, not 4, not 3, 5. All males, all large, all younger than the one they had brought down together. They had needed every advantage to do it. He noted that the way he noted everything now. Several hours passed. The shadows shifted across the kill site. One of the five rose, walked heavily to the carcass, and took more. The others slept on. The young lion's throat worked, a low sound that did not quite become a growl. He had not eaten in 4 days. The hunger was a separate thing, a companion that walked beside him in the grass. It whispered to him constantly, telling him the carcass was meat, telling him the five were full and slow, and that he could slip in, take shreds from the edges, be gone before they stirred. He did not move. You have to understand what it costs a young male to resist that. Every instinct in his body was aimed at one thing, and it was not revenge. It was survival. The calculation was simple. 5 fed lions against 1 starving adolescent was a death sentence. Every muscle in his legs was ready to carry him away, and yet he stayed. Not because he had a plan, not because he understood what would unfold in the weeks ahead. He stayed because something in him had locked onto the scene like a cub watching its first hunt. He needed to remember this. Every detail, every face. The oldest of the 5, the one who had taken the most from the body time and again, lay at the center of the group. He had the darkest mane of the 5, and a scar through his left eye that had healed white. He was the one who had made the first bite. The young lion had missed that moment by a day, but he had followed the drag marks backward, and he had read the ground. The ground told him everything. The old male had been caught at the watering hole, a place where the grass was low and the approach impossible to hide. They had come at him from 3 directions, and he had fought backing away, his heels leaving deep grooves where he had anchored himself to hold his ground. There was no dishonor in how he fell. The young lion read that too. The tracks showed the old male had taken one of them down with him, had separated a shoulder on another before the weight of the rest had finally folded him. The killing itself had been fast, once the numbers told, but the eating had been slow. That was what the young lion could not look away from. The body had been opened and emptied, the long bones cracked for marrow, the hide turned like a discarded garment. They had stayed with it for more than a day, and they had talked while they ate. the low grumbles of males sharing a meal, the sounds of family. They were not his family. He knew that now. He had been born to an earlier pride, fathered by a male who had held this territory before the old lion took it. The old lion he had watched die was not his father by blood. That was the strangest part of what held him in the grass. The old male had killed his father, years ago, in a fight much like the one at the watering hole. The young lion had been a cub then, too small to understand, hidden by his mother in thickets, while the roar of the challenge shook the leaves above her head. And when it was over, the old male had come into the territory and done exactly what all males do. He had killed the cubs that were not his own, so the females would come into season again, so his blood would replace the blood he had ended. The young lion had survived because his mother had hidden him well, and then had hidden him again and again, until he was too large to carry and too fast to catch. She had done it alone, without the protection of a male, because the new king had no use for a rival's cub. So he owed nothing to the old male. The old male had been his father's killer. The old male had tried to kill him. By every law of the savannah, he should have felt relief watching the body being taken apart. Instead, he felt the territory empty. That was the only word that came to him, lying in the grass with his belly knotted. The territory was empty. The roar was gone, and something in him, something older than his hatred of the old male, something that remembered the shape of the land beneath his paws as he had learned it at his mother's side, understood that emptiness as a wound. That emptiness was not a failure of understanding. It was the first loyalty the young lion had ever felt to something larger than his own survival. Subscribe if you want to keep witnessing what that loyalty does next, without the noise this channel was built to leave out. Write the word wound in the comments if you have ever recognized an absence that still held the shape of what it replaced. The five were not from here. They had come in from the east, a coalition of brothers, driven from their own range by drought and a stronger pride. They had found the old male alone, and they had done what any male coalition would do. They had seen an opportunity. The young lion had been gone 8 months. In that time, the territory had been stripped of its guardians. The old male had ruled alone for the final year, holding ground against the lone challengers who came and went. A lone male can hold a territory for a long time if the hunting is good and the challenges are weak. But 5 brothers is not a challenge. 5 brothers is an army. They had arrived with the confidence of animals who know the math is on their side. And the old male had gone down fighting the way all lone males go down eventually, when the numbers finally catch up. Now, they would claim the territory. They would find the prides within it, the females who had been waiting for the old male to return from his patrols. They would kill the cubs they found, and they would father new ones, and the territory would become theirs. The young lion understood all of this. He had seen it happen before in other ranges, during his months of wandering. He had watched coalitions of brothers sweep through and remake the land in their image. That was the way of things. That was the discipline of male lions, the endless cycle of challenge and replacement. What he had never seen was a lone male doing what the old male had failed to do, a lone male defying the math, a lone male walking into a circle of 5 and changing the outcome. He had never seen it, because it was not supposed to happen. The numbers did not allow it. 5 brothers against 1 male was not a fight. It was an execution, and the execution had already taken place at the watering hole. But the eating was still happening, and the flies were still thick, and the young lion, lying in the grass with his hunger and his memory and the strange emptiness in his chest, was still present. He had not left. He was watching the way he would watch a hunt he intended to understand completely. The oldest of the 5, the one with the scarred eye, raised his head and looked directly toward the tree line where the young lion had stood hours before. The young lion's breath caught. He was deep in the grass now, invisible, but the old male struck him as an animal who trusted his instincts. The scarred male held the gaze of the empty tree line for a long moment. Then he lowered his head and went back to resting. The young lion did not breathe again until the massive head dropped below the line of the grass. Here is the moment where the story could have ended. That was how close it came. The young lion could have risen from his cover, turned south, and walked away into the scattered woodlands where the hunting was poor, but the danger was small. He would have been a lone lion, surviving on the margins, waiting for a chance that never came. Instead, he watched the scarred male's breathing slow into sleep. and something in his own breathing matched it. He was not thinking in words. He was thinking in territory. He was thinking in the dry riverbed where he had learned to drink, and the ridge where the wind always came from the same direction, and the old fig tree where his mother had left him while she hunted day after day, returning with her flanks wet and her jaws empty more often than not. She had taught him the land. She had shown him the hidden paths, the places where a lion could move without being seen, the ambush spots, the escape routes. She had spent her last months alive doing nothing but this, pouring the map of the territory into his young head. Then she had gone out one evening and not come back. He had found her at first light, at the edge of the hippo pool, where the ground was churned and the silence was absolute. He had stayed with her body through the day, the way he would now stay with the kill site. He had learned to be still. He had learned to watch. The five were still asleep. The sun was past its peak. The young lion rose from the grass in a single motion, silent as the shadow that had held him. He moved away from the kill site without looking back, his path angling toward the riverbed, his steps placing his weight with the care of an animal that knew the ground was full of eyes. He did not go far. Half a mile from the kill site, he found a thicket of wild jasmine, dense enough to hide a sleeping lion. He lay down in the shade, and he let the exhaustion of the last 2 days wash over him. But before he closed his eyes, he looked back toward the direction of the carcass. The wind was still carrying the scent of blood and badly digested meat. He had not eaten in 4 days. The hunger was a fire in his belly. He closed his eyes. He did not dream of the kill site, or of the old male, or of his mother. He dreamed instead of the territory as it had been when he was a cub, full of pride and noise, and the constant low music of many voices. It was the only dream he had, and he returned to it gratefully, the way a lion returns to a den he has hidden well. He woke in the dark, and he was not alone with his hunger anymore. There were 2 hyenas working the edges of the thicket, drawn by the same scent that had drawn him. He did not move. The discipline his mother had taught him was the only thing between him and starting the whole chain of events too early. The hyenas moved on. The night settled around him, and in the long hours before dawn, the young lion's mind did its patient work, folding the map of the territory over the memory of the 5 males, marking the places where each of them had walked, where each of them had slept, where each of them had fed. He was not planning revenge. That was a human word, and it came with human assumptions about justice and balance that the young lion carried no trace of. He was doing something else. He was learning where the threats were. He was calculating the territory as an equation of movement and opportunity. What he would do with that calculation he did not yet know. The hunger was beginning to hollow him out, and a hungry animal does not plan. A hungry animal reacts. But the discipline held, and something else held with it. Something that had locked the image of the scarred male's face into his memory like a paw print in wet clay. The first gray light came, and the young lion rose. He would eat today. He had to eat today, or the next decision he made would be the last one. He moved downwind, quartering through the scrub, his nose working the air for anything that had died in the night, or any prey that had been weakened by the long dry spell. He found a young wildebeest separated from its herd, standing at the edge of a dry pan, too sick to follow the others. It saw him at the same moment he saw it, and the animal's head came up, and the young lion's body gathered itself. It was not a clean kill. He was not yet the hunter he would become. The wildebeest dragged him across 40 yards of open ground before it fell, and he lay over it with his jaws buried in its throat, spent and shaking. But he ate. He ate until his belly rounded, and the fire inside him became a warmth. He dragged the remains into a thicket and covered what he could not finish with grass, the way his mother had taught him to hide a carcass. Then he lay down beside it, licking his teeth, and the calculation began again. The territory had 5 new kings, and he, the unwanted, the displaced, the one who should by all rights have been dead before he learned to walk, was something they had not accounted for. He was a male who had grown up in this land, who knew its every fold and shadow the way the old male had known them, the way only a native knows them. He rested through the heat of the day, and in the afternoon he rose and began to walk. He did not walk toward the kill site. He walked the long way around, following the old paths his mother had shown him, paths the 5 would not know existed. He was going to look at the territory through fresh eyes. He was going to read the land the way a new king reads it. And he was going to find the places where the five would be most vulnerable. Not because he had decided to act. Not yet. He has not decided to act. But the old paths are already drawing a line none of the five can see. Subscribe and keep following this return. The next part of the account is already moving through the grass. In the comments, leave the word paths if you saw the advantage before the lion did, or tell me which fold of land you would have watched first. But he was back in the territory now, and the emptiness in his chest had a purpose. The map in his head was folding itself into something sharper, something harder. He stopped at the top of a low ridge and looked out over the long grass, and for the first time since he had found the kill site, his hunger was not the loudest thing inside him. The five were sleeping in the heat. They did not know they were being watched. They did not know the territory had a sixth voice now, a voice that had grown up in it, a voice that knew the land the way they never would. The young lion turned and descended into the long grass, and the first day of his true return ended the way it had begun, with the wind bringing him the scent of the kill site and the memory of what had been taken. He lay down in another thicket, belly full, eyes open. The night was quiet. The territory was sleeping poorly, and somewhere in the dark, one of the five coughed, the sound carrying half a mile, and the young lion's head came up off his paws. He filed the sound away, the way he filed everything now, the location, the direction, the implication. He would know their voices soon. He would know their habits, their paths, their resting places. He would map them the way he had mapped the land itself, patiently, without urgency, the way his mother had taught him to learn. And when the map was complete, he would do what his body and the empty territory demanded of him. Not revenge. That was a human word. The young lion was not thinking in words at all. He touched the ground with his nose, tasting the layer of scent left by the five, and something in his chest closed around the knowledge like a jaw closing on a throat. The land would be whole again, or it would be empty. The land would belong to one voice, or to no voice at all. Those were the only two futures the territory could hold. He spent the next 3 days learning the rhythm of the territory through the ground itself. Each morning, he walked the old paths, reading the layered scents, the way his mother had read the wind. The dry riverbed held the signature of the scarred male, a heavy marking along the bank where the lion had come down to drink and had left the territory's claim in slow, deliberate passes. The young lion stayed downwind of every trace. He was not moving toward the five. He was moving around them, building the map in his head until the territory arranged itself around their presence, the way water arranges itself around stones. On the fourth morning, he found the carcass of a zebra that the five had killed and abandoned. The meat was 2 days old, thick with flies, but the young lion ate what the hyenas had left, and he did not waste a mouthful. The discipline of hunger was simple. Take what the land offers, no matter the state of it. He was finishing the last of the scraps when the sound reached him, a low, rolling cough from beyond the ridge, followed by the heavier sound of a male lion's grumble. The five were moving. The young lion froze with his jaws red, ears swiveling, and he read the direction and the pace of the movement the way a tracker reads a spoor. They were not hunting. The rhythm was wrong for a hunt. This was a patrol, the slow, possessive circuit that a male coalition makes through its new ground, marking, listening, asserting the shape of its rule. The five were learning the territory the way the young lion had learned it as a cub, but they were learning it from the top down. As conquerors, he followed them at a distance that kept him invisible. He watched them mark the fig tree where his mother had left him during her hunts. He watched them bed down in the shade of the same acacia where he had hidden as a cub, while the old male fought his father. The territory was being rewritten, its old maps torn up and replaced, and the young lion watched it happen with the same patient attention he had given the kill site. The scarred male was the one who dictated the pace. He walked ahead of his brothers, pausing to scent the air with his head high, his scarred eye glinting in the afternoon light. The other four followed his lead without question. They were not a family in the way a pride was a family. They were a machine, each part moving in the rhythm the oldest had set. The young lion catalogued the hierarchy without needing to think about it. The scarred male was the center. The other four were the weight that made the center possible. A coalition of brothers held together by blood and habit, each one stronger than the young lion alone. But here was the thing he noticed. watching them move across the ridge. The scarred male was the strongest, but he was also the oldest. When the coalition settled for the night, it was the scarred male who took the center of the bedding ground, and the others who slept around him in a loose ring. They slept the sleep of animals that knew no one in the territory could challenge them. The young lion lay in the grass a quarter-mile away, and he let the fact of that sleep settle into him. 5 males, no threat, no vigilance, no memory of the 6th voice that had grown up in this land. The territory was still telling them they were safe. The territory had not yet told them about him. The first thing he did, in the dark of that night, was not to test them. It was to test the territory itself. He moved down to the riverbed, and he called, a single low note, pitched not as a challenge but as a question. The sound rolled through the dark and faded into the stones, and he listened to how the land answered. The territory answered with silence. The silence told him the truth. The old male was gone. The females were hidden deep, waiting to see which voice would claim them. The territory was a question mark, and he had just asked it a question of his own. The 5 did not stir. The call was too subtle for their sleeping ears, or perhaps they heard it and dismissed it. The way any animal dismisses a sound it does not recognize as a threat. Either way, no head lifted, no grumble answered. The young lion returned to his thicket and lay down, and he understood something that the 5 did not. They had come into the territory and taken it by force, but they had not been born into it. They had not drunk from the dry riverbed as cubs, or hidden from storms in the roots of the fig tree. They were kings of a land they had never learned to read, and a king who cannot read his land is not yet a king. He gave them a week. The dry season was deepening, and the hunting was growing harder with each passing day. The 5 had fed well on the old male's body, but that was a single meal, and a territory cannot live on its dead king for long. The young lion watched them hunt the scattered herds, and he noted the patterns. The scarred male led most of the hunts, and the others followed his directions. They were efficient, deadly, but they hunted like animals that did not know the land's secrets. They did not use the hidden gully where the wind always died, where a patient hunter could close the distance without being scented. The young lion knew that gully. His mother had showed it to him when he was small, pressing his nose into the soil, teaching him the way the air behaved in that particular fold of the land. It was one of a dozen such places, the secret grammar of the territory that only a native could read. He filed the gully away. He filed away the places where the 5 drank, the times they moved, the way the scarred male always walked a little apart from his brothers when the hunting was done. None of it was a plan. It was all an observation, the patient accumulation of a map that was becoming sharper than any map the 5 could ever draw. By the end of the week, the young lion was beginning to change. The meals were small but regular, and the hollow in his belly was less a fire than a low, steady ache. His body was remembering its strength. The last awkwardness of adolescence was gone from his movement, replaced by the economy of an animal that had learned to spend nothing it did not have to spend. And then the rains came. Not the real rains, the turning of the season that would fill the riverbed and green the grass. These were the false rains, the brief, teasing showers that came and went in a single afternoon, leaving the land no wetter than it had been but sharpening the air with the smell of wet dust. The 5 moved during the rains. They had been pushed by the shifting herds toward the eastern edge of the territory, where the grazing was thin and the water was a long walk from the shade. The young lion watched them go from the top of the low ridge, and he noted the direction and the distance. And when they were out of sight, he did something he had not done since his return. He turned his back on their path and walked west, deeper into the heart of the territory he had grown up in, toward the hidden places the 5 had not yet found. He was going to the den, not the den of his birth, which was a shallow scrape in the riverbank, long since collapsed and overgrown. He was going to the den his mother had used in the final months, the one she had chosen with the care of an animal that knew her time was short, a hollow beneath the roots of a massive baobab, hidden so well that even the hyenas had never found it. He stood at the mouth of the den, and he did not enter. The roots had grown over the opening, sealing it the way a wound seals. But he could smell her still, faintly, under the years of rain and insect life, the last trace of the only family he had ever known. He lay down in front of the den, and he stayed there through the night, not mourning, not remembering in the way a man remembers. He was doing what his mother had taught him to do. He was listening to the land, and the land was telling him the old story, the story of the female who had hidden her cub from a king's vengeance and had poured her whole self into his young head before she went out one evening and did not come back. In the morning, he rose. He had not allowed the den to change anything, but something in him had settled, the way sediment settles in still water. He turned to the east, where the five had gone, and he looked out across the long grass with a stillness that held no urgency at all. The five came back 3 days later with a fresh kill, a buffalo cow they had taken at the edge of their range. They dragged it back to their favored resting ground and ate well, and the scarred male lay in the shade with his belly full and his scarred eye half closed, the picture of a king at ease in his realm. The young lion watched from the cover of the thorn scrub, and he ate grasshoppers he caught with his tongue, the way he had as a cub, and he waited. The waiting was not patience in the way a man practices patience. It was something else, something physical, a holding of the body and the mind in a single low gear. He knew what he was waiting for, not a moment of weakness, not an opening. He was waiting for the territory to show him the shape of its answer. The land had a memory, and the memory was older than the five, older than the old male, older than his own father. The land remembered every lion that had held it, and it remembered how they had held it. The land remembered that a male who holds it alone must hold it harder than a male who holds it with brothers. The land remembered the old male's loneliness, the way he had patrolled the boundaries alone, the way his roar had carried a note of something worn and tired beneath the power. The young lion was waiting for the land to show him whether it would accept one voice again, or whether it had dissolved into the scattered claims of the five. The answer was coming. The territory was already beginning to speak it, in the layers of scent and the patterns of movement, in the way the females were beginning to creep out of their hiding places and test the new kings. The land had already begun to speak, and the question had narrowed to a single choice: one voice or five. Subscribe to stay inside the record as the females make that choice, because the next part of the sequence opens without pause. In the comments, leave one voice if you read the territory bending toward a single ruler, or 5 voices if the scattered claims hold. The record resumes. The females were the land's truest readers. They had survived every change of regime, every new male, every wave of cubs killed and replaced. They knew which voice would last. They knew before the males knew themselves. The young lion had not yet seen them. They had stayed hidden since the old male fell, waiting for the chaos of the transition to settle. But he could smell them now, the faint, complex traces of a pride in hiding, and the smell carried a question of its own. One of them had come out of hiding enough to leave a trail to the only waterhole that had not yet dried. The trail was fresh, a matter of hours, and the young lion followed it the way he had followed the drag marks from the kill site, reading the ground with his nose. She was a lioness of middle years, her coat marked by a healed wound on her shoulder, her teats worn from seasons of nursing cubs that were no longer with her. She had seen the old male fall. She had hidden her newest litter from the five, and she had survived the weeks of uncertainty by the same discipline that had kept her alive through every change of the territory's fortunes. She stood at the waterhole and she drank, and she did not see the young lion watching from the grass. He was downwind of her, invisible in the low light, and he watched her the way he had watched the five, filing away the details. She finished drinking and she raised her head, and she looked, not at him, but toward the east, where the five had gone. She stood still for a long moment, her ears tracking the silence, and then she turned and walked back toward her hidden den, her steps unhurried, her tail low. The young lion watched her go, and he understood that she had not smelled him. But he understood something else too, something the five had not yet grasped. She was the land's voice. She was the one who would decide, in her own time and in her own way, which king the territory would hold. He did not follow her. He did not approach the den. He lay down where he was, in the grass at the edge of the waterhole, and he let the fact of her settle into the map he was building. The territory had a queen now, a silent queen who had not yet chosen, and the territory had a young male who had grown up in its bones. The five returned from their patrol in the evening, and the scarred male went straight to the waterhole. The young lion had already ghosted away into the thorn scrub, but he had left nothing behind. No scent he could not cover. No print he had not brushed flat with his tail. He lay in the thicket, and he watched the scarred male drink, the massive head dipping and rising, the scarred eye scanning the darkening land without alarm. The scarred male was confident in a way that only an animal at the top of its world can be confident. And that confidence was a thing the young lion had learned to read. He was not waiting for the scarred male to make a mistake. The scarred male was too old and too careful to make the kind of mistake a young huntsman could punish. The young lion was waiting for something else, something the territory alone could give him. He was waiting for the first moment when the five would not be five. A coalition of brothers is a machine only while it stays together. A coalition of brothers is a collection of individuals the moment the bonds loosen. The moment one of them walks a few paces apart from the others. The moment the oldest decides a thing, the youngest does not understand. The young lion had seen it happen before in the wandering months. Coalitions that held together for seasons and then split. The brothers drifting apart until each one held a smaller piece of the old range, or lost his piece entirely. Blood held them together only until the territory demanded more than blood could give. He was not waiting for the split. He was waiting for the first seam, the first crack in the machine, the first night when one of the five lay apart from the others and the watch in the grass noticed. The night came, and the seam came with it. The youngest of the five, a male not much older than the young lion, had been restless all evening, pacing the edge of the bedding ground, looking out toward the north. The scarred male had grumbled at him once, and the younger male had lain down, but his eyes remained open, and his ears remained aimed at the dark. The young lion saw the restlessness, and he recognized it. The youngest of the five was not at ease. He was a male who had been driven from his birth range by this very coalition, by the fact that there was no room for him at the center, and he had stayed with his brothers because staying was safer than leaving. But the restlessness was the first seam. The young lion had seen enough to know that a coalition of brothers always held one male who was not fully committed, one male who was waiting for the moment to leave, the way the young lion himself had been driven out and had wandered until the territory called him home. He lay in the grass, and he watched the youngest of the five stare north, and he knew that his map was nearly complete. The territory, the queens, the seam, the habits of each male, the places where each one drank and slept and walked apart from the others. It was all arranged now, a landscape of possibilities. He had not yet decided to act. The decision was not his to make in the way a man decides. The decision was being made by the land itself, by the pressure of the dry season, by the hunger of the five, by the restlessness of the youngest brother, by the silent queen who had not yet chosen. But he could feel the decision coming together in the dark, the way he had felt the shape of the hunt before it began, the way he had felt the emptiness in the territory the moment he had scented the kill site. The land was moving toward a single point, and the young lion was moving with it. In the morning, the restlessness of the youngest brother had passed, and the five moved out together to hunt, the machine intact. The young lion watched them go from the top of the low ridge, and he saw the youngest brother glance back toward the north one last time before he followed the scarred male into the long grass. He did not follow them. He stayed on the ridge, and he let the territory speak to him in its own voice, the voice of the wind and the dry riverbed and the hidden queen. The decision was forming. The land was telling him the shape of what was to come, and the shape was a thing he could finally, quietly, begin to act on.